Welcome to Second Take, the show that focuses on the issues behind the news. Carbon capture and storage is seen by some as one of the significant solutions to the challenge of reducing the world's carbon footprint. Mining Weekly editor Martin Creamer is with me in the studio today to explain the concept. Welcome to the studio, Martin.
Thank you, Shannon.
Can you explain carbon capture and storage technology?
Well, carbon capture and storage has really become a buzzword, and we've been fed it in large quantities this week, because in South Africa this week it was declared Carbon Capture and Storage Week. But of course that conjures up ideas that you're going to go and get black carbon and you're going to put it in the ground. The real thing is that it's carbon dioxide capture and storage. So that's the first thing that we've got to get straight. It's the gas that they're capturing. And this gas is the culprit that they are blaming for global warming. So that's where it all starts. They're saying you are to blame carbon dioxide for climate change. So what are we going to do about you? And the idea, and it's a really convoluted idea that I'm sure someone coming from Mars would laugh one's head off about, is to firstly capture this carbon dioxide. And where do you capture it? Well, where it's emitted. And where it's emitted in large quantities in power stations or in synfuels plants like Sasol. You know, Sasol is said to be the world's biggest single site emitter of carbon dioxide. So the next step, of course, is the capture. And they say that, you know, the capture part and the compression part, which is the technology, is the most cost. That's where most of the cost comes in. And then the transport is the thing that follows. You've got to take it in a pipeline and store it somewhere. And the ideal place in geological formations that have saline aquifers, so that, because that's where it gets absorbed into the water, and it needs to go at least 800 meters down. So you have to have it at least at a depth of 800 meters, and the idea is that it'll eventually change form over time. And then the fourth thing is to make sure that it doesn't go back into the atmosphere. In other words, it doesn't leak. So it's quite a job. You know, first of all, capturing it, compressing it, transporting it, injecting it into the ground, and then making sure that there's no leak.
So then where in South Africa could we store it? You mentioned saline aquifers.
Yes, the jury's still out. And the atlas, they're drawing up a carbon capture and storage atlas as we speak. And what they are thinking of doing is looking for geological formations that are ideally suited to this. And they don't know where those are in close proximity to some of the plants. I mean, a lot of people are saying we might have to take it to the Karoo. Some of the people at the conference were saying we might have to take it right out of the country. So I should imagine that the cost is going to be quite acute. And the people who buy electricity generated from coal obviously have to look towards paying that cost. Sasol itself, because it already has the CO2 largely captured, it's probably going to be in a situation of advantage. But because the volume is so huge, it's still got to find places to store it. And there is a team of engineers and scientists that's working on that right now. So you not only got the South African National Energy Research Institute working on this scenario, but you also got individual companies on it, and notably Sasol, and also coal companies in general are looking quite earnestly at how to deal with carbon capture and storage.
Now, you mentioned that it's quite expensive. What type of cost do you think we're looking at?
Well, you know, when they presented this week, there were a lot of speakers who were saying that, firstly, we must see it as a transition. In other words, it's not ideal to continue to burn coal because it has this effect of creating carbon dioxide. But we've got no option as the world. We're going to continue to do it for probably another half century. But during that time, that half century must be a period of transition where you use the carbon capture and storage as a mitigation technology and an adaptation, and then you bring in the real renewable energy, so it gives us time to bring in renewable energy. It's just a transition period where we have to use this carbon capture and storage technique. But they are talking about the fact that the cost factor will mean that although coal has been the cheapest up to now, it will no longer be the cheapest, and it will move up to the level of, say, nuclear. So the costs will become increasingly great to a point where people say, well, let's go with nuclear, let's go with renewable energy, and particularly nuclear is probably next in line. As these costs mount, it will be economically feasible to put up more nuclear energy plants, which of course don't come with the CO2 baggage.
Now, Martin, is there any other use for CO2 besides storing it?
Well, there are some companies looking at converting CO2 into other useful, commercially saleable substances. And one of those is Sasol. Sasol is in the business of fuel. So it's saying, you know, why put all this carbon dioxide into a cavernous hole underground? Why not try and convert it into something commercially useful ahead of time? And they believe that through algaic labyrinths, I might as well call them, they can actually convert the CO2 into methanol. So then you will have, you know, planet-warming CO2 or carbon dioxide being converted into clean-burning methanol. So you'll have a double benefit. You'll be getting rid of the CO2, which is the culprit of global warming, and at the same time, you will be getting a clean-burning fuel like methanol. And it's not only Sasol, of course, that's looking at this. I think in April, there was an institute in Singapore which announced this big breakthrough that they had converted CO2 into methanol successfully. And of course, methanol is an interesting fuel. I mean, it can be used in the new hybrid cars, for instance, that are being built. It can be used in fuel cells if that becomes the engine of the future. And it has this benefit of being clean burning. But I noticed a lot of the Australians that were at the conference this week were very skeptical about this, because they say that you're producing carbon dioxide in such huge volumes that, you know, the volume of whatever you produce in it is going to be so huge, there might not be a ready market for it. So you'll have to use a whole lot of different solutions. You know, firstly, you must be efficient so that you don't put the CO2 into the atmosphere. If you are going to put that CO2 into the atmosphere, you're probably also going to have to do carbon capture and storage. And then with some of the remaining CO2, you'll try and turn it into product that is commercially saleable. And so you've got a whole suite of different jobs you'll have to do to make sure that you mitigate against climate change and global warming from this culprit called CO2.
This is truly fascinating stuff. Thank you so much for joining us.
Great pleasure.
Thanks, Martin. That's the show for today. Join us again next time for more insight into the happenings of the mining world.